Welcome to Alpine Daily for Tuesday. And if you've been tracking with us on Tuesdays, we've been working through the book of Hebrews. We've come to chapter 11. Now, to give you some background, the whole first 10 chapters of the book have all been working to establish the uniqueness of Jesus, how he's superior to everything that the Old Testament represented. There were people who were drifting back into Judaism and rejecting Christ, but the book shows us that Jesus is superior to the Old Testament law, the covenant, to Moses, to the sacrificial system, to the high priesthood of the Old Testament, to the Sabbath, to the temple, all the rest. In fact, Jesus gave a perfect sacrifice so that we could be saved. That's why we can trust him for salvation. And as we come to the latter part of the book now, we find the personal application to those truths. If all of that is true about Jesus, if he truly is supreme and unique, then that calls for us to trust him. Chapter 11 is about faith and how to live by faith. Now we learn that faith is confidence in realities that we cannot see. And we see that in Hebrews chapter 11, starting in verse 1. Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is the definition of faith. There's so much in the world that we can't see with our physical eyes, but we can trust in because God has promised. And so faith is our confidence or assurance in the things that God has said are true, even if we can't see them. And then he goes on to tell us that faith is demonstrated throughout the Bible by what verse 2 calls the ancients. This is what the ancients were commended for. And the whole chapter then gives a list of individuals from the Old Testament who trusted in God, who exercised faith in the promises and in the goodness of God in spite of difficulties, in spite of challenges. And each of them stands as an example, as a witness to us to encourage us to trust in God as well. So it starts here with Abel, and it goes on from there. Now, as we go down the list, at the very beginning is the central verse of the whole book of Hebrews, the whole book, chapter 11 of Hebrews, that tells us that faith pleases God. And that's in verse 6. You see, it talks about Enoch, and he's part of the list, and then after verse 6, it goes on to the rest of the list. But in verse 6, this is the heartbeat. He says, without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe. If you're going to come to God, have a relationship with him, that starts with faith. And he points out two things that we must believe: that God exists and that God rewards those who earnestly seek him. And so from this we learn that faith begins when we trust Jesus to be right with God. That's the whole point of the book of Hebrews. Jesus has done some things that we can't see now. Back in history, 2,000 years ago, he died on the cross. He rose again from the grave. We can't see that, but we have confidence in those realities by faith because we believe what God has said. And then faith also continues as we rely on Jesus' promises day by day. To live for God, to live in obedience to God, takes faith. And so I encourage you to be a person of faith. And so you might want to think about these questions about your faith and your experience of faith. So go ahead and pause the video and think about these things and pray about where you stand in your faith in God.